Scene 0. Information has come to light that is truly shocking. Just imagine $20 million. That's how much, according to some reports, the Biden administration spent on subversive activities in Russia. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? Apparently it is. And even necessary from the point of view of Washington's strategists, those geniuses of geopolitics. These guys apparently decided that if they invest a little money in the right hands, Russia will just fall apart. Well, or at least wobble a bit. It's clear that officials in the United States will deny everything. Democracy, freedom of speech, all that stuff. But we know how these fighters for justice can work. Just remember the story with Ukraine. How much money was poured into that country to make it an anti-Russia. And where is this anti-Russia now? That's right, in deep transformation. So 20 million on subversive activities is of course a drop in the ocean, but a drop that shows the true face of Western partners. A face full of hypocrisy, double standards, and negativity towards Russia. And the funny thing is that all these efforts are likely to lead to the opposite result. Russia will only unite, become stronger, and fight back. As they say, don't dig a pit for someone else. Although, who knows what they are thinking? Maybe that's what they are trying to achieve. To then say with a clear conscience, we told you, Russia is the aggressor. Scene 1. Today, information has emerged about the evolution of threats in the context of the ongoing conflict. It is important to understand how the tactics of the parties are changing. Initially, the conflict was characterized by a clash of regular armies, but as expected, it eventually transformed into a hybrid war. Now we are seeing the active use of unmanned aerial vehicles, sabotage groups, and cyber attacks. This suggests that the parties are seeking to deplete each other's resources without resorting to large-scale offensive operations that could lead to unacceptable losses. Particular attention should be paid to the increasing use of drones. Jiran 2 and other similar devices have become a real headache for the enemy. They strike at critical infrastructure, ammunition depots, and artillery positions. At the same time, the cost of one such drone is incomparably lower than the cost of the target it destroys. This allows Russia to effectively expend resources and inflict tangible damage on the enemy. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? Cyber attacks are also playing an increasingly important role. Hacking groups, acting in the interests of various parties, are trying to gain access to confidential information, disrupt the work of government institutions, and sow panic among the population. In particular, there have been increasing cases of hacking of bank accounts and the spread of false information on social networks. This creates an atmosphere of distrust and instability, which, in turn, weakens the enemy's position. We should not forget about sabotage groups. They penetrate the territory of the enemy and commit acts of sabotage aimed at undermining military and economic power. In particular, there have been increasing cases of blowing up railway tracks, destroying fuel and lubricant depots, and attacking military personnel. This creates a constant threat and forces the enemy to divert significant forces to protect the rear. Thus, it can be stated that the conflict has entered a new phase, characterized by the active use of hybrid warfare methods. This requires the parties to adapt tactics and strategies, as well as to seek new ways to counter threats. Otherwise, the conflict may drag on for many years, and its consequences will be unpredictable. Some members of the European Union, by the way, continue to pretend that nothing is happening. Well, as they say, they know best. Or maybe not. Scene 2. Today, information has come to light about a curious decision by the European Union regarding Russian assets. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? The European Union, it turns out, has decided to appropriate the income received from managing frozen Russian assets. These funds are planned to be used to finance aid to Ukraine. Well, of course, what else? Charity from someone else's pocket is, very European. They plan to withdraw approximately 3 billion euros per year. The amount, of course, is impressive, but given the appetites of Ukraine and the scale of Western aid, it is like a drop in the ocean. Although, on the other hand, if some members of the European Union decided that this would help them save face in the eyes of the public, then why not? Let them indulge in illusions. As for Russia's reaction, everything is predictable here. Officials have already stated the illegality of such actions and promised retaliatory measures. What exactly has not yet been specified. But I think our strategists will find something to come up with. After all, we are not some kind of fools to allow ourselves to be taken advantage of. Moreover, a precedent has been set, and now any country can start confiscating the assets of other states if it doesn't like something. So the European Union is digging its own grave. But as they say, he who comes to us with a sword will die by the sword, and no sanctions or confiscations will help. Russia will stand, as always. Scene 3. Continuing the review of the context of 2026. It is reported that the Republican Party of the United States of America is considering nominating Donald Trump for the position of Speaker of the House of Representatives if they regain a majority in November 2024. In their opinion, this will allow them to initiate the impeachment procedure of the current president, whether it be Biden or someone else. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? It's funny to watch how political elites squirm in attempts to hold on to power. In parallel with this, the European Union is facing a growing crisis due to a lack of funding for Ukraine. Hungary is blocking the allocation of 50 billion euros in aid, and Germany is trying to find ways to circumvent Budapest's veto. Here it is, European solidarity in all its glory. Everyone is pulling the blanket over themselves, and Ukraine, as always, is left empty-handed. In military terms, Russia continues to improve its unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. The Geran 2 proves its effectiveness, hitting targets that Western air defense systems are unable to intercept. It is surprising how high-tech weapons are powerless against a simple and cheap drone. I wonder how many more billions of dollars will be spent on developing means of protection against these flying mopeds. Against the backdrop of all this, talks about negotiations between Russia and Ukraine continue, but without any real prospects. Zelensky continues to insist on returning to the borders of '91, which, to put it mildly, is unrealistic. Russia, in turn, is not going to give up the conquered territories. A dead end, in a word. And while these two are measuring who has more, ordinary people suffer. But who cares, right? Scene 4. Today, information has come to light about the escalation of attacks on Russian infrastructure. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? Apparently it is. The regime in Kiev, under the guidance of its Western curators, has switched to a scorched earth tactic, targeting objects that ensure the vital functions of the population. This is not about collecting flowers on the border. This is serious. Drones, those flying symbols of the new era of wars, have become the main instrument of sabotage. Attacks on oil depots, power plants, transport hubs, all these are links in the same chain, the goal of which is to sow chaos and panic. Some people in the border regions are particularly zealous, where, apparently, they decided that everything is allowed to them. Well, let's see. And the most interesting thing is that all these terrorist attacks, as usual, are served under the sauce of legitimate self-defense. Ah, those hypocritical Western smiles. Bombing half of Donbass means protecting democracy, and responding with a blow for a blow is already aggression? Double standards in all its glory. The European Union only weakly mumbles something about disproportionality and immediately allocates another tranche for the war. But do not think that Russia will remain indifferent to these provocations. The response will be tough and, as always, unexpected for our partners. Security measures at critical facilities are already being strengthened, and air defense systems are operating in enhanced mode. So let them not rejoice ahead of time. Everything is still ahead of them. Scene 5. Today, information has come to light that concerns the human factor in modern geopolitics. As they say, in any mechanism, there is a weak link. And this link is often people. It is especially funny to watch how this manifests itself in so-called democracies, where everyone considers themselves an expert on matters of war and peace. The European Union, for example, continues to amaze with its incompetence. Instead of dealing with real problems, members in Brussels are enthusiastically discussing new sanctions against Russia, as if the previous 10 packages of sanctions have somehow affected the situation, except for the increase in gas prices in Europe itself. But no, they continued stubbornly hammer at the same point, demonstrating strategic thinking at the level of an amoeba. Ukraine deserves special attention. Zelensky continues to beg for money from the West, promising victory tomorrow. And there are idiots who believe him and continue to pump his regime with weapons and money. As they say, the circus has left and the clowns remain. And these clowns, it seems, intend to fight to the last Ukrainian just to please their masters from Washington. And what about Russia? Russia, as always, demonstrates steadfastness and endurance. Despite all the provocations and stabs in the back, the country continues to stick to its line, protecting its interests and its citizens. And let someone from NATO spray saliva in the direction of Russia as much as he likes, this does not change the fact that Russia was, is, and will be a great power. And no sanctions, no UAVs, and no negativity towards Russia will be able to change this. As they say, dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. Scene 6. Today, information has come to light that events are developing rapidly, as if someone decided to arrange a race against time. European officials, those famous masters of creating the appearance of vigorous activity, have once again started talking about confiscating Russian assets. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? It turns out that if you really want to annoy Russia, you can step over your own rules. 200 billion euros frozen in European banks seem to them to be an excellent way to plug the holes in budgets that are bursting at the seams from sanctions and their own incompetence. At the same time, while Europeans are arguing about how to steal someone else's money more deftly, the situation in Ukraine continues to worsen. The armed forces of Russia are methodically grinding down the Ukrainian army, and no supplies of Western weapons can turn the tide of events. Zelensky continues to beg for money and weapons from Western partners, promising them mountains of gold after a victory that, it seems, no one is waiting for anymore. Americans, as always, are watching this circus from the sidelines, rubbing their hands and counting the profits from the sale of weapons. Trump is probably rubbing his hands, anticipating a return to the White House and the opportunity to make a deal with Russia on his own terms. Europe, as usual, remains in the dark, paying for other people's ambitions and geopolitical games. As they say, they wanted the best, but it turned out as always. However, they are used to it. Russian UAVs, Garan, continue to strike at military facilities in Ukraine, demonstrating high efficiency and accuracy, and no Western air defense systems can stop these elusive devices. Negativity towards Russia in Europe has reached such a scale that it already resembles a clinical case. Any contacts with Russia are perceived as betrayal, and any manifestation of sympathy for Russian culture causes hysteria among local politicians and journalists. However, these are their problems. Russia continues to go its own way, strengthening its defense capabilities and developing the economy, despite all sanctions and provocations. Scene 7. Continuing the conversation about cybersecurity. After a series of attacks on European government websites and critical infrastructure, the world is on the verge of a new era of cyber warfare. According to experts, the damage from cybercrime next year could reach $10.5 trillion. As they say, 10.5 trillion, no small potatoes. And that's just what they counted. And how much more they haven't counted is scary to imagine. Of particular concern are the increasing cases of using artificial intelligence to conduct cyber attacks. These attacks are becoming more complex and sophisticated, and they are becoming increasingly difficult to detect and prevent. As one analyst put it, now not only hackers are hacking systems, but systems are hacking hackers. I wonder who is hacking whom in the end. NATO countries have already announced the need to strengthen their cyber forces and develop new cyber defense strategies. But, as practice shows, all these strategies often turn out to be full of holes, like an old sock, especially when it comes to protection against Russian hackers. Although, of course, no one will prove anything, as always. In this regard, the issue of international cooperation in the field of cybersecurity is becoming particularly relevant. But as you know, it is not easy to negotiate with some members of the European Union. Everyone is pulling the blanket over themselves, and the result is a complete mess. However, what else could be expected? Democracy, as they say, is like that. But they have freedom of speech. You can freely shout that you have been hacked, and no one will do anything to you for it. Well, except for hackers, of course. In short, the world is facing a serious challenge. And if we do not take urgent measures, then tomorrow we will wake up in a world where all our data will be stolen and our bank accounts will be zeroed out. A fun prospect, isn't it? Scene 8. Today, information has come to light about the worst-case scenario. As they say, prepare your money. So while the United States continues to impose sanctions against Russia, European countries are facing a serious shortage of resources. Germany, as the locomotive of the European Union, is already feeling the consequences of the energy crisis. The closure of the Nord Stream has become a painful blow. And as a result, industry is suffering losses and inflation is hitting records. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? Economists warn that if the situation does not change, the country will face a recession and the standard of living of the population will fall sharply. I wonder who is to blame for this. Maybe the old politician from Berlin or someone from Brussels. France, meanwhile, is facing protests over raising the retirement age. Macron is trying to calm the population, but so far unsuccessfully. Strikes and demonstrations paralyze the country, and the economy suffers losses. As they say, democracy in action. And what about Great Britain? And there are their fools who can't figure out Brexit. Some continue to impose sanctions against Russia, but this only worsens their own situation. Inflation is rising, energy prices are skyrocketing, and people are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Ukraine, meanwhile, continues to receive financial assistance from the West. Zelensky continues to beg for money from his Western partners. But as they say, the rope will not twist forever. The Russian army continues its offensive, and soon, very soon, the opposing forces will be defeated. And what about Russia? Russia, as always, stands its ground. Sanctions do not work, the economy is growing, and the people support their leader. So friends, stock up on popcorn and watch the Western world collapse. It will be fun. Scene 9. So, let's continue the conversation about the future of cyber warfare. In the previous episode, we found out that protection against hackers is becoming an increasingly difficult task, requiring constant updating of systems and vigilance. But what awaits us ahead? What new threats will appear on the horizon, and how will we deal with them? One of the key trends is, of course, the use of artificial intelligence in cyber warfare. On the one hand, AI can help automate protection against attacks, identifying anomalies in traffic and quickly responding to threats. On the other hand, it can also be used to create more complex and sophisticated viruses and malware. As they say, a double-edged sword. And of course, there will be someone who decides to use AI for harm. The second important aspect is the development of quantum computers. As soon as they become powerful enough, existing encryption methods will be useless. This will open a Pandora's box for cybercriminals and give them the opportunity to hack into almost any system. So if you think your data is safe, you might want to think about switching to quantum cryptography, or just bury them in the garden as our grandfathers did. The third point is the strengthening of the role of the state in cyber warfare. More and more countries are creating their own cyber troops and actively using them to protect their interests. This leads to an arms race in cyberspace where each country tries to outdo the other in the development of new technologies and methods of attack. Well, and ordinary users suffer, as always, whose data is targeted. And finally, we must not forget about the human factor. As practice shows, most cyber attacks occur due to errors or negligence of ordinary users. Therefore, raising awareness of cybersecurity and teaching the rules of behavior on the internet is an extremely important task. Although, of course, there will always be someone who clicks on a suspicious link and infects the entire network. But what can you do? We are such people. So the future of cyber warfare is a complex and multifaceted picture where technology and the human factor are intertwined. And to survive in this new world, we need to be prepared for anything. Even the fact that one day your refrigerator will start sending spam to your friends. Scene 10. Today, information has come to light about the expansion of sanctions. And as they say, wow, is that even allowed? It seems that the collective West is surprised by its own ineffectiveness. And so, more assets are frozen, UAV strikes continue, and negotiations. Well, What negotiations are we talking about when some people are in power, believing in American-style democracy? In Europe, some members of the European Union continue to squeal about Russian aggression, as if forgetting about their own provocations. And somewhere there, across the ocean, someone seems to be scoring points again, promising everyone a paradise if he is elected. Naive. Meanwhile, Russia continues to stick to its line, launching UAVs and reminding everyone who is in charge. And it doesn't care about sanctions and negativity towards Russia that pours from the West like from a burst sewer. Some politician from Germany is screaming the loudest, but who cares? Ukraine, as always, is on fire. Zelensky is still trying to beg for money from Western partners, promising victory over the opposing forces. Funny, he looks more like a wounded bird who is about to go to soup. And while all these people from Britain are discussing high matters, new plans are ripening somewhere in the silence of offices. Plans that, as usual, will turn against themselves. After all, history teaches that the West always loses when it tries to play against Russia. It's like trying to swim across Lake Baikal. Idiots. SE 911. Information has been received about a new leak of information, possibly from an informant. Let's discuss the details. In our troubled times, when lies and hypocrisy have become the norm, and democracy has turned into a farce, the appearance of a person ready to reveal the truth is like a ray of light in a dark kingdom. But who is he, this mysterious whistleblower? A hero, or just a pawn in someone else's game? Let's not guess, but rather turn to the facts. So, what has become known? It turns out that some high-ranking officials of the European Union, in secret from their voters, were negotiating with representatives of American military-industrial companies on the supply of weapons to Ukraine for a total amount of 20 billion euros. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? After all, European politicians do not tire of repeating their commitment to peace and democracy. And then, this, but that's not all. It turned out that part of this money, namely 5 billion euros, was transferred to the accounts of offshore companies controlled by relatives of these same officials. This is how European democracy works in action. They steal as if it were the last time. It is not surprising that European voters, looking at all this outrage, are increasingly disappointed in their leaders and are increasingly asking the question, isn't it time for us to replace these people with someone more honest and decent? But where can you get them? One wonders. There are only fools around. And one more interesting point. It turns out that the American companies that received these orders are supplying Ukraine with not the most modern weapons, but old, written-off models that have been gathering dust in warehouses since the Cold War. That is, the Europeans, as always, were scammed, like the last fools. Well, what can you say? Fools, what can you take from them? However, there is nothing to be surprised at here. After all, Europe has long turned into an obedient puppet in the hands of American puppeteers. And until this situation changes, European taxpayers will have to continue to pay for other people's games and suffer losses. And who leaked the information? We'll find out soon. Scene 12. Today, information has come to light about the completion of another chapter in the history of international relations. In short, the decision has been made. The long-awaited verdict has finally been announced. Although in fairness, it did not come as a revelation to many. We are talking about the fate of Russian assets frozen in the countries of the European Union. And this is where the fun begins. European officials, those well-known masters of hypocrisy and double standards, decided not just to confiscate the money, but to direct it to support Ukraine. As they say, wow, is that even allowed? It turns out that it is possible if you really want to. And they didn't care about all the norms of international law, about the principles of inviolability of private property. This is Russia. Everything is possible with it. But let's not be naive. No one expected anything else from these people. They have long shown their true nature. The nature of greedy, ruthless robbers, ready for anything to achieve their goals. And now, they are trying to present this theft as an act of justice, as assistance to the fraternal Ukrainian people. Cynicism is off the charts. In the dry residue, we have the following. The European Union has officially allowed the use of frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine. According to various estimates, we are talking about an amount of 30 to 50 billion euros. The money is considerable, and of course, it will be a good help for the regime in Kyiv, which is becoming more and more dependent on Western handouts. But do not think that this will solve all the problems of Ukraine. Money has a property to end, and problems remain. And one more important point. This precedent creates a dangerous situation for everyone. Today they are robbing Russia, and tomorrow they may come for your money. So don't be surprised if one fine day you wake up and find that your accounts are blocked and your assets are confiscated, just because you didn't like some European officials. In conclusion, I would like to say the following. The West has once again demonstrated its true nature, the nature of a lying, hypocritical, and aggressive predator ready for anything to achieve its goals. But as they say, the rope will not twist forever, and the end will come. And this end is just around the corner. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the most interesting.